I'm Susan Wild, and I'm a congresswoman. I represent the 7th District of Pennsylvania. I was born in an Air Force family. We moved around every 2 years during my childhood and adolescence. And so I never really developed roots until I settled in the Lehigh Valley in the 80s. It wasn't a linear path to running for Congress. I started off practicing law in the 80s. Before coming to Congress, I thought the biggest challenge to being a member, not counting getting elected, which I saw as probably the biggest challenge, was going to be knowing how to do the job and doing it well. And it's kind of interesting because when you get to Congress, there's no employment manual. Every office, 435 representatives, they all run their own offices. The offices are run very differently. You are essentially running what's almost a small business. There are some things that are standardized, maximum number of employees is a rule and that kind of thing, but otherwise, you're running your own show, and you get there, and the phrase you hear the most often when you first get there is, it must feel like a fire hose just opened on you, because just all this information. So everything from, the stuff you really need to know, which is how to draft a bill, how to make a difference, how to vote, to the smaller things, like how do you engage with your community. And it's different for different members of Congress. So depending on your district, if you have a very urban New York City district, it's a lot different than if you have a very rural district. And so a lot of it is just learning on the job, and I didn't realize how much of it there would be. The most unexpected thing about being a member of Congress is the huge time commitment. I was no stranger to a job that demanded a lot of hours. I was a litigator, spent, hours and hours and hours getting ready for trials and that kind of thing. I was used to that. This is a time commitment in a different kind of way. We often say weekends don't really mean anything in our job. That doesn't mean we work every single weekend, but it does mean that if there are events and things that you need to go to in your district on a weekend, and especially since we spend 50% of our time in Washington, then you're working on a weekend. You are going to these different events, you're meeting people and that kind of things, and it's also no predictable work day. Definitely not 9 to 5. And so that is probably what I expected. What came as the biggest surprise to me was just how incredibly time-consuming it is, and also how hard the teams have to work. By that I mean the staff. They also, if I'm working on a Saturday, somebody on my staff is working on a Saturday, and same thing, late at night, that kind of thing. So it's not a normal kind of time commitment job. Politics are way too influenced by money. We have got to eventually see campaign finance reform in this country. It is mind-boggling how much money goes into politics and what an influence it has. So there's two things. Number one, members of Congress are now in a position of having to raise way too much money, and so ridiculous amounts of time are spent. And I put my foot down very early in Congress when I found out that the usual practice was to show up to one of your committee hearings at the beginnings when they gavel in, because that records that you're there, and then let's say you're not going to speak for another hour. What customarily would happen is people would leave, go do their call time, or what we call dialing for dollars, and then come back right before they were to speak. Well, that didn't sit well with me, because having been a lawyer, I was used to trials where you sit there from the minute it begins until the minute it ends. And I thought, how can I know what's gone? I mean, even if my team were to fill me in on what other things happened, excuse me. So I said no to that. So that cut into my call time a lot. It wasn't a popular decision with some of my folks, but it's worked out well for me. Aside from the time commitment that members of Congress are spending, there's also the influence factor. I don't take corporate PAC money. That was a decision I made back in 2018 when I started running. Regarding human nature, most people are compassionate and kind. I want to be remembered first and foremost for being a great mother to my 2 adult children. And I want to be remembered for putting our community, the greater Lehigh Valley, on the map. When people think of Pennsylvania, they tend to think of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh if they're from out of state. And let me tell you, the federal agencies in Washington think only about Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. So I came to Congress literally with a mission that I was going to make sure that our district, the third largest region in Pennsylvania, the fastest growing region in Pennsylvania, was very much on the radar. So that's what I want to be remembered for. I hope my children will be happy, compassionate to others, and sensible.